Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Liz Lang. Each week on this podcast, we will break down various aspects of mental health. We are so excited you're here and hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Jeremiah and Selina from Core Connection. And this week we are going to get into helping teens leave unhealthy friendships. And before we do that, this week's parenting moment is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be more of a discussion. And this comes from a podcast that I was listening to. One of the social media influencers that I like is Dr. Mike. He's fairly popular, and so he does a podcast that I listen to called The Checkup, and he had a pediatrician on recently, and they were discussing doctors asking parents to leave the room after like the physical exam so that the doctor can talk to the teen. And he discussed why this is so valuable, so I thought it would be a good discussion as to kind of what all our thoughts are. We talked about it a little bit beforehand, and we differ in what our thoughts are. So why don't you guys start us off? I would love to hear what you guys think about this.
Well, I don't have a lot of context for what you're talking about. I haven't listened to this particular podcast, but my first response is always going to be no, absolutely not. First of all, typically you don't know your doctor very well, and the doctor is there for medical health reasons, not for social protections or things of that nature. And so, there might be a circumstance where I think that could make sense, but for me, it's going to be pretty rare. What does a doctor want to talk to my child about that I shouldn't be able to hear or know or understand? And quite frankly, I guess I hope I have the relationship with my children, and we always have in our house, that our kids aren't going to want to talk to the doctor without mom and dad there. I don't think I've ever come across a situation where one of my children wanted or were even comfortable with that. Maybe I could understand if there was some extenuating circumstances, and I get it, this idea and need to protect children, especially if there's signs of abuse or things like that. But there's other ways for doctors to manage that if that's going on. So I would almost always say no. That's not the doctor's responsibility. That's mine as a parent.
Sure. And I would imagine even for you, so for example, and maybe Selina, you might view this a little bit differently, but if you're taking your older daughter to a gynecologist for some reason and she has to have some type of a pelvic exam, in that instance, okay, I can see a teen being like, yeah, mom, I'd rather you not be here for that, which I think is reasonable. And to be fair, he was talking about in the teenage years, right? So obviously this isn't going to happen when your kid is 7, 8, 9. I don't think they even started until about 12 or 13. And even that I can understand being a little bit young for me. And I know that after the age of 13, kids are able to basically manage their own medical care without even the consent of their parents. And I don't love that. I understand why.
That really varies quite a bit by state.
Okay.
And the other piece of that too is that regardless of what the state believes or wants, parents actually own all childhood information. And so like even in the therapy world, right, we can have counseling sessions where parents don't know everything that's being talked about and discussed. Yet if a parent wants a court order to see all those notes and documentations, they will win that battle every single time in every state across the country.
Yeah, and I can see that, and if my kid needs to talk to somebody, if they need therapy, I want them to feel comfortable saying anything. Now, in the world of therapy, there are exceptions to, and this includes healthcare as well, there are exceptions to that client-patient confidentiality, right? So harm to yourself or others, or if harm is being done to you, then confidentiality has to leave that room, right? Because they have to report it. But beyond that, I would want my kid to feel safe talking to this therapist about anything that's going on without worrying that it's getting back to mom, right? To mom and dad. But that's different than healthcare. So, and my stance on this with doctors is it's up to my kid, to be honest. Now, again, my oldest, she's 13. And we haven't come across this. At her yearly checkup, they haven't asked. Now, if she's 15 or 16, and if the doctor says, hey, do you mind stepping out? I'm immediately going to look to my kid. And if my kid says, yes, I want to talk to the doctor by myself, okay. But if my kid says, no, I want you to stay, I'm not leaving. And I imagine most pediatricians would also respect that as well.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And there may be cases where that, like I said, where that makes sense. I would imagine typically what doctors are looking, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, is that they want to ask questions like, are you sexually active?
Yes.
Are you using drugs? Are you using alcohol? And they don't necessarily want the parents to know. But, I'm not a doctor, so I don't really pretend to understand that world and what's going on there. But I don't know that the doctor necessarily needs to know that information unless there's something going on that they're concerned about. And so, I guess if my kid really wanted me to step out, I'd probably be looking for someone to go with them that I trusted and not be alone with a doctor that I don't necessarily know. But, maybe that's just my old school way of thinking. I don't know.
And I honestly think that's reasonable.
I guess it's hard for me to understand this because my 18-year-old still is begging me to go with her to the doctors when I told her to go by herself. But I guess I had a similar situation in this, that I had a friend that her kid was going to a therapy session and the therapist asked for her to not be in the room, and the child was pretty young. And she asked me my opinion on that. And I guess my opinion would be like, what is the therapist wanting to talk to, or in this case, the doctor? What are they wanting to talk to your kid about that they don't want you there? And I think that would help determine whether you thought it was better for your kid to not be there or better for you to be there. And so I would just be cautious and ask those questions as to why they want you to leave and what the purpose of you leaving would be and how that would be helpful for your kid. I appreciate, Liz, that you're saying what your kid is comfortable with and what they're wanting. I think that brings a factor into it, because if we're being pushy that we have to be there and that makes our kid uncomfortable, then that's really not helping them either, right? And so I think I don't know, maybe just understanding the bigger picture, understanding all the elements of it, but also protecting your kid. And I think as parents, we know if we get that like, no, this isn't okay feeling, it's okay to stand up for that too. But also to empower and advocate for our kids. It's okay to stand up for them and know what's best, and to be able to speak against that, or like, oh, no, thank you, I'm going to be here to help them, because we have that right and we have that responsibility to help our kids.
Yeah. And don't doubt your instincts either, because just because you're a doctor doesn't mean they can't be a predator of some sort. And I'm sure even doctors would say that. So if something doesn't feel right, or if you get weird vibes from that doctor, don't ignore that instinct, because just because they're a doctor doesn't mean they can necessarily be trusted. And that's important too.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that trusting those instincts are important. And like I said, I feel like there are situations or circumstances that make sense. I don't think this is a black and white issue.
Yeah.
I think some in the industry would believe it is, but I don't believe it is. And when we look at the therapy world on this particular topic, it's really hard to have a good therapeutic relationship with a teenager whose parents have to know everything. They're not going to have a conversation. But when we've moved into the therapy world, we're often dealing with situations and struggles that are complicated in their lives that have kind of led them to that point in the first place. And so if mom and dad have to know everything, we're not going to make the progress that we need to make. But I guess I view the medical world just a little bit differently, but there are circumstances. And I can tell you, I have been asked to step out of a room, and I have done it when it made absolute sense. And it was really a social worker for me, not a doctor. But that circumstance warranted me stepping out of the room and allowing my child to be able to be comfortable speaking a little bit more freely about what was going on for them. So yeah, it just depends. I guess that maybe that's my final answer.
Yeah.
My question to the doctor would be is, why would you be uncomfortable if I was here?
And this pediatrician was clear. They said that oftentimes if a kid is engaging in sexual activity or there's drugs and alcohol, they're not likely to talk about it in front of the parents. And so the doctor is looking to have that conversation about how to keep the kids safe if they are engaging in those behaviors. And I understand that dilemma of, is that really the doctor's job, right?
Yep.
That's ideally, no. That should be the job of the parents, right? And parents should be managing that. But I also understand where, you have parents who they're going to freak out on their kid and they're not going to handle it well. And so the kid is terrified to talk to mom and dad about that. So honestly, I see both sides. I totally can understand, why parents are uncomfortable with it. And I can totally see why doctors feel a need to. So I think, again, it depends. It depends on your kid. It depends on your relationship. If I had a kiddo who's like completely despondent and I know they're doing things that aren't safe and it like, and they won't talk to me, then yeah, I am more likely to step out of the room so that this doctor can have this conversation with the kid, because you can do all the right things as a parent, as we've said, and your kid can still go out and be a little miscreant and doing all the things that they shouldn't be, and so sometimes
Yep.
you do have to balance safety. But again, if the doctor asks me to step out and my kid says, no, I don't want you to go, I'm not going anywhere. And I don't care what the doctor says. But again, a doctor's going to respect that kid because it's not going to help that doctor patient relationship if they're making the kid uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. And I think maybe just one more thought on this, and that is that when we look at the perspective of safety, like, well, this way the doctor can educate the child on how to keep them safe sexually or using drugs and alcohol. Well, your definition of keeping a kid safe and mine could be worlds apart. And so that's going to be another concern of mine. And if my kid is in that situation that you're talking about, Liz, I've probably already got them in therapy before the doctor's getting involved in something of that nature. At least I hope I do. We never know. But, I guess there's just a lot of ways to look at that and a lot of things to consider. And it's just not a black and white response.
Yep, I would agree. And neither is today's topic. So helping teens leave unhealthy friendships, that's a tricky one. Almost just as tricky as what we just talked about. So why letting go can be an act of self-respect. So this one can be, again, one of those tough ones because it's developmentally normal for teens to really value friendships. So their friends kind of become their whole world and they really derive a lot of identity and belonging. And that's developmentally normal, appropriate, and healthy. But what do parents do when the relationship is toxic, when it is not healthy? Now, there can be instances where safety is a concern. And if there is safety, whether it be an emotional relationship or just a social relationship, if you ever have to take action, I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be pretty extreme to have to take legal action or something like that. Those are going to be extreme cases. So we're talking about more general instances of this friend just isn't good for you, and kind of helping your teen recognize that and then helping them find the courage to, distance themselves or what have you, helping teens figure that out. So walk me through your guys' thoughts on this and kind of what that process can be like.
Again, like you said, this can be really complicated, and friendships are hard, relationships are hard. Teens are figuring it out. They're learning to understand it. And one way to look at this and maybe try and understand a little bit about what happens here is that, when kids start in elementary school, when they're young, they don't have any prejudice. They don't have any concern. They'll be friends with absolutely everybody. But when we start into late elementary, early junior high, and forward, we start to notice differences, and we start to separate and form smaller cliques and groups and friendships that maybe align better with who we are, and also they kind of align with our social standing, right? How cool we are. And so what kids are doing subconsciously often is they're looking at how their association with somebody may affect their standing socially. Meaning, if I hang out with this kid, they're not cool. Their cool factor is going to bring my cool factor down. But if I hang out with this other kid, they're more popular and their cool factor is going to bring my cool factor up. Right. And so it's kind of this game of like, how do I maintain my social standing in the school or in, whatever thing we're involved in. And so it gets really complicated, and there's a lot of fear for children around these relationships. And so it is a challenge. And as parents, there are certainly times that you may have to take legal action when it comes to safety. That's something that Selina and I have had to do one time. I hope I never have to do it again. It's awful. But there are times where you've got to protect your children. And there are times that we can learn how to manage this and help our children manage and build relationships. They can learn what healthy relationships look like. And we're going to talk about some of those things today. But I think that as parents, most of the time we do it all wrong. I know I do, and I have. And I think it's just because of our perspective, right? We look at these friendships as generally somewhat temporary. Most of us don't maintain our childhood friendships throughout the lifespan. As we get older and we get married, we have our own families. Family becomes more important and friendships become less important for most, not always. And some people just have that one or two people that are, just their dear friends for life. And some people have lots of friends, but primary relationships turn to family. And so when we look at this, we're like, oh, good grief, why are you even hanging out with that person? Just stop. Like they're horrible. They're not kind to you. They make your life difficult. But that is so dismissive of what your child's experiences are. And it destroys the connection between you and them. And it creates this divide of, you don't understand. You don't care about my friendships for me. You don't care about what's important to me. And so we want to be a little bit careful there.
So some of the things you were talking about, Liz, I look at my kids and they've dealt with those and with all of their friendships. So I think it's important to realize that some of those things are normal. They're going to change to fit in. They're going to exclude and start hanging out with certain friends or feel like, oh, I can't lose them as a friend. Some of those things are just totally normal in that development. It's not like a cause for concern if some of those things are happening with your teenager. But this has come full light recently as I have a daughter who just started high school, and it's been real interesting to watch her group of friends that were all friends in middle school and to watch them going into high school and their nerves and their worries, and then things that my daughter has shared with me of like what different friends are experiencing and how they're reacting. And just even the first day of school, they came home and she's like, I think so-and-so is mad at me. And just trying to help her and realize that like everyone's nerves, everyone's scared, everyone. So it reminds me of back to the concept of back in the caveman days, and you had to be a part of this tribe. And it was life or death if you were in this tribe or not. So you didn't want to be an outsider. And I just see it again with these kids going into high school, because she even mentioned like, oh, there's this girl that like I saw her at school. I didn't even know we were friends, and she's totally talking to me. And in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, because she wants to make sure she's safe in the tribe, right? She wants to make sure she has somebody at lunch. She wants to make sure that she's protected and part of this tribe. And so watching all of these kids as they're trying to figure this out, just seeing that concept of they all want to make sure they have somebody that they can sit with at lunch. They don't want to be by themselves, and they want to make sure that they have a group that they belong to. They want to make sure they have a friend. And so trying to figure that all out. Nothing bad with it. It's just interesting to watch how that social dynamic plays out as a new school year, especially when you go into something like high school or middle school for the first time, and how trying to figure that out and understand how that works.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you've both kind of brought up healthy relationships and that they are not always perfect, right?
Yes.
Healthy relationships include disagreements and hurt feelings and misunderstandings. They should have different opinions and sometimes even periods of distance. Like, my closest friend, I don't talk to sometimes for 6 or 8 months. And then we get together and it's like we hung out every day for the last year. And so periods of distance are not bad. A healthy relationship always includes some differences and some differentiations in different types of things. And So I wouldn't be concerned about that as a parent, but they should be more occasional and not problematic. What we're really looking for when it comes to unhealthy relationships is really kind of mean things like
Mm-hmm.
consistently being critical or putting somebody down, manipulation, especially excessive jealousy or like repeated exclusion, right? Or controlling factors, like pressure to do things that might violate their own boundaries, that peer pressure thing of maybe engaging in behaviors that they're not comfortable with, they don't want to be a part of. There's a lot of different things that we want to look for there, but usually they're a little more cruel and mean. They're manipulative. They'll try and make your child feel responsible for their own emotions, things like that just aren't healthy. We're not talking about the regular normal disagreements or differences of opinions or things of that nature.
Yeah. So here's a real life example. If you hang out with them instead of me, we're not friends anymore. So a teen begins canceling plans with other friends to keep the relationship. Does this fall under creating connection or control? So
Those
important
are just
question here.
control behaviors, right? Like,
Yeah.
a real friend is going to be happy for you when things are going well. They're going to be sad with you when things are not going well. And they're going to encourage you to have other friendships and relationships because they're going to have them. Those are just normal behaviors that we want to see in teens' relationships with their friends.
Yeah. So why is it so hard for teens to let go? And I think the answer really comes down to belonging is so important for teens, feeling that sense of belonging. And one of the best ways to safeguard teens is to help them have a sense of belonging at home. And sometimes that can be easier said than done, but that's really a great place to start with teens is, them knowing and understanding no matter what happens between your friends, every one of your friends could turn on you tomorrow. You still have a safe place here in our home. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be painful and extremely hurtful when a friendship does go wrong or when they have to leave a friendship. But, I think that's one of the best things we can do to safeguard is to make sure they have that belonging within the home.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a critical piece, and relationships outside of the home are a big deal for teens.
Yes.
And so that's why we're discussing this today, right? Is that we want to help our children, our teenagers, understand what healthy relationships look like. How do I build my own confidence and my self-respect and dignity and maintain healthy and appropriate relationships? And how do I walk away from, or maybe not even always walk away from, but how do I distance myself from those who are unhealthy in my social circles? But it is hard, and like you said, that sense of belonging is important, and it's really fear-based, right? Like that's why it's difficult. They're afraid of that social standing I was talking about earlier. They're afraid that they're going to get talked about by that friend. They're afraid of missing a friendship or a relationship that they wish they had, even though it never maybe was really there. They're afraid they might not find another friend, like you're talking about that belonging piece, right? They don't want to start over. There's just so many different things that a kid might be afraid of. Again, this is where we tend to get it wrong as parents, and especially me. I'll end up saying something stupid like, why don't you just stop being friends with them? Like, they're jerks, like knock it off. But it is just not that simple. And their entire world often is connected to relationships with people outside of the family, especially as teenagers. And so here's where we can start to help them is we can learn to ask questions, right? And help them start to learn to evaluate their relationships. And of course, this can start even at a much younger age than teenagers. But when we ask questions that help them come to the understanding of where the relationship's at, we don't have to say, why don't you stop hanging out with them? They're going to be like, maybe I don't want to do that. And some of those questions might be like, well, how do you feel after spending time with this individual? Or do you feel like you could tell them no? Can you disagree without being afraid? Or does that worry you if you disagree with them? Or are you afraid they're going to stop being your friend or something of that nature? A big one is that, do you feel respected in this friendship? And do you feel like you can be yourself within the friendship as well? And does this friendship help you become the kind of person that you want to be? Those are just a few simple examples of questions we can ask that help our kids start to think about and learn to evaluate what a relationship might look like that's healthy.
It's important to understand that right now the development stage that they're going through is identity. And so the work that's to be done is, like you said, filling that belonging at home, which is really easy for us to say that, oh, you have us at home, but we're not the ones going every day to school and having to face that social setting. But I think also the work that's done is on yourself, as in the teen, helping them to discover and decide who they are. Because right now the identity is trying to figure out who they are outside of and beyond their family and their parents and what they've already learned to this point. But like, who am I as a person? What's important to me? Who do I want to be? What choices and what do I think? And they're finding that outside of the already secure family. They're finding that in other people. And so helping them the work to be who they are, to be confident and to build on their relationship with themselves, to have that confidence with themselves, is going to help them in turn be able to have these friendships and stand up for who they are.
Yeah. So how do we help a teen actually leave? Let's explore this, because sometimes we might think it's got to be this big dramatic, almost like ending a romantic relationship, right? Like, oh, we're breaking up. I'm never talking to you again, and that's it, we're done. It doesn't actually necessarily have to be that dramatic. So what's a good way to look at this, or to help your teen see that it doesn't have to be this big world ending or this big dramatic event? What's a good way to look at, a friendship coming to an end?
Well, sometimes it could be a big dramatic thing, and that's okay too. But in general, yeah, I guess I would prefer to see it as creating distance, right? Like slowing down the interactions. If they were, spending 3 or 4 days a week, their free time with that friend, maybe we start to see them once or twice a week. Or one of the things that I think is really powerful is starting to teach your kids that they don't have to respond to everything immediately. Even I've become guilty of this. Like, I feel like, oh, I got to respond. Somebody sent me a text or somebody called me. I need to call them right back. No, we can teach them, like, hey, you don't have to respond immediately. It could be a day or two later. That starts to create a little bit of distance for them. We can start encouraging them to participate in other activities not associated with that friend. And I think one of the biggest ones, and probably a good place to start, is to start building bigger relationships with others, right? Because the loss of that relationship is difficult, but it is eased. And please don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's eased. It's made a little bit better when we have other relationships. If we just say, hey, I'm done with you, and that was your only friend that you spent all your time with, all your free time with, well, now you're really going to feel that loneliness and that frustration and those things that they're afraid of are coming to pass in that moment. So if we can start to reconnect or to connect with healthier friendships and relationships prior to creating the distance or at the same time, it's going to help them maybe through that struggle.
Going back to building that confidence with your kid, I'd like to give other kids grace. As we're going through this, I think of lots of situations that my kids have been, and my kids have been the problem of two other friends, right? Mm-hmm. My kids have been the other end of causing these problems for their friends. And so I like to try to give some grace in that these are kids just trying to figure out life. And I don't think sometimes it's always the intention of being mean or controlling or hurting. They don't have the experience with relationships and how to be in those relationships. And so they're all learning and growing, and trying to give them that grace. So circling back to that confidence in our kids is when these situations do come up in relationships, just helping empowering our kids to set those boundaries or set those expectations or speaking up for what they want or what it is they need with those friends. So not always just like, oh, I'm going to cut that relationship off. I realize there are extreme, and sometimes it does just need to be cut off, and it's more hurtful than it's worth the effort being put in. But I feel like in general, these situations come up a lot in friendships. And so being able to teach our kids to have a voice, stand up for what they want and what they need, and just communicating that to the other person and communicate how they're feeling or what they need is an important skill, because it's going to help them in lots of different situations in their life that will come up.
Yeah, because I think sometimes a friendship can just be draining, and, the friend that's doing the draining doesn't always recognize that they're doing it, right? So maybe your kiddo has a friend who's just constantly needing reassurance, or just constantly needing, attention, and just wants to always talk about their problems. And your kiddo is just exhausted by this friendship. That's not malintent by the other kid. That's that kid, like Selena said, trying to figure out life. They've got an insecurity. They've got their own issue. And so I love this idea of helping our teens to advocate for their needs, right? And helping them to stand up and create healthy boundaries so that, maybe they can create good emotional boundaries in that friendship and maintain it, or just, maybe back the friendship off and, like we said, form new ones. I think either one is fine and appropriate.
Yeah, I had some of the same thoughts as I was preparing for this podcast, and I thought, man, I think my kids have been on both sides of each of these different scenarios we've discussed, and they've been the maybe the problem friend in the relationship, and they've been on the receiving end. And so I love the idea of grace and boundaries and understanding how to kind of set that up, and helping our kids build the confidence so that they can say things like, I'm not comfortable doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know what, I'm not okay with you talking to me that way, so I'm going to head home now, or whatever it looks like, right? But teaching them how to set those good boundaries and healthy responses that builds confidence in themselves and confidence in their ability to manage friendships.
Yeah. And, again, I think it's a good idea to point out, we're not talking about instances of like bullying and cruelty, right? And consistent problems that really do require maybe the parent to get involved. And those certainly can and do happen, as you guys mentioned, it may be appropriate. But I think those are the exception rather than the rule. I think most kids are just trying to figure out how to be a human being and how to be a decent human being, because sometimes teens, they can be incredibly self-centered and not mean to or realizing it. So yeah, just giving teens that empowerment.
And just to touch, since our podcast is about helping teens leave unhealthy friendships, you might deal with a situation that it is truly unhealthy and hurtful and harmful to your kid. And so just to empower and encourage you to advocate, you have every right. Even if your kid hates you, if you feel like that's what needs to happen and that friendship needs to end, you can put those restrictions in place and you can remove them from those situations, and you do what you feel like is best. I think teaching and guiding them along the way and helping them to understand, they might not understand or agree or be mad at you about it, but if there is a situation that your kid is in danger emotionally, physically, any of that, absolutely, you're going to remove them and restrict that and not allow that.
Yeah, and I love the confidence idea that we've been talking a little bit about too, and building that confidence in them, building self-respect, and helping kids to understand what it actually is and what it's not. We live in a world right now where if you have a differing opinion than me, like, it's considered hate. And it's really not, right? Like, we should be able to have different opinions. But self-respect isn't things like I deserve to get my own way, or anyone who disagrees with me is toxic, right? Like that.
Yep.
That's not self-respect. It's just unhealthy. It's an unhealthy way of thinking. Or we don't want to teach them that I leave a relationship whenever it's difficult. Like that's a terrible thing to teach our children. So I really hope that we're not, leading people down that road, because just because it's difficult doesn't mean we have to leave it. But self-respect is knowing your values and protecting your boundaries, your appropriate, healthy boundaries. It's expecting other people to give you that mutual respect and being willing to walk away from persistent mistreatment. Self-respect is taking responsibility for the way you treat others and your actions in those friendships. And sometimes we have to have that conversation with our children, right? Like, what is your role in this? What is your part in these struggles. It's teaching them to choose relationships that would allow you to be yourself. Like there's just a lot of different things that self-respect is and isn't. And by teaching them and helping them understand self-respect and to utilize that tool, that will help build their confidence. And it will actually help them build healthier, more appropriate friendships and relationships. And then that'll move on into their, dating life and married life and family life and children life. Like those relationship habits carry through to all different aspects. So this is really an important topic.
Yeah, and I especially love the idea of teaching teens to disagree. Like you don't have to agree on everything to be friends. And that can feel scary for teens because teens put so much, like we said, emphasis in belonging that sometimes misalignment of beliefs or even core values can feel like we're too different and that means we can't be friends. Or if I don't believe the same way as my friend, if I don't have the same core value, then we can't be friends, or I'm not going to fit in, I'm not going to belong. So helping your teen to kind of dial back. So religion is a really good example here. Maybe your friend is devoutly religious, but then your friend has got a kid and we're both devoutly religious. So, we could fall into this. And this kid is like, I don't see the value of religion at all. I really don't get it. And I'm not interested in it at all. Helping your teen to have the confidence, say, I understand where you're coming from and I see you and I see your opinion, but we don't have to share this same core value to get along and to be friends and to hang out. And I think really in that instance, it's helping your teen establish, what are my values? What are your values? How can we respect each other's values is really what it comes down to. That's going to be so valuable for kids throughout their entire lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the key here, right? Is helping kids to understand the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships and how to respect one another, how to work through conflict. Healthy conflict in relationships is a very good thing. And it's a reality. I don't believe that there are ever any marriage relationships or true friendships where there's not some sort of conflict. Like there's always going to be conflict. Because we have different opinions, we have different perspectives, we have different views, different ideas, and often different morals and standards. And so working through that conflict in a healthy way is a wonderful skill. And we're talking about leaving relationships that are unhealthy, that are not just because we have a difference in opinion. They're not just because we had a little conflict. It's because we're being mistreated, we're being abused, we're being manipulated, we're being disrespected, on a regular basis. And that's what we're talking about. We want our kids to understand the difference. We don't want them to, again, that toxic relationship idea. I guess that's a great buzzword that's used often, right? But it's misused, and it's just not a reality. Most relationships probably aren't toxic just because they disagree with you. They just have a different opinion, and it's okay to have a different opinion. That's what makes the world go round.
Yeah. Diversity is a beautiful thing. Diversity in thought is absolutely wonderful. And helping kids to celebrate diversity of thought is great. Okay, so next week we are going to get into loneliness, and we will see you all then. Have a question? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com.